welcome to another episode of the Social Z podcast. I am your host, as usual, Calvin Smith, coming from beautiful Destin, Florida again. Been on the road the last few episodes, but glad to be back in the hot weather here. Super excited to have our first husband and wife group conversation going here with Nick and Leah. Nick and Leah, how are you guys?
Great, great. Thanks for having us.
Yep, doing good.
Awesome. Perfect. So our general process here is we have each of you do a quick introduction, just 60 seconds, kind of your name, where you're from, what your business is, and anything else that can fit into 60 seconds. So Leah, you want to kick us off?
All right, my name's Leah Whited. I was born and raised in Elyria, Ohio. Now we live in Amherst. I have my bachelor's degree in accounting. I have my real estate license, and now we have our own franchise with recruiting with Patrice and Associates. And I'm doing all kinds of other stuff on the side, like bartending and being a mom, and you name it.
Everything but sleeping, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Thank you, Leah. It's great to have you here. And Nick, what about you?
So born and raised actually in the same city. We're just outside of Cleveland, about 30 minutes or so. We met in college, so same undergrad degree, accounting and financial management. I went on to get my MBA as well. I ended up in the HR field for most of my career and got my certified professional certificate through Society of Human Resources as well. And then, like she said, we kicked off together, starting a recruiting franchise. I sourced that out and vetted that, and she joined along. And then I also have a consulting firm, Aqueous Consulting, which I do a lot of HR and business consulting. We both do tactical support and then strategic leadership as well.
Awesome.
Well, his was much more
great.
fancy than mine.
You can tell I'm in HR, right? I mean, I have the PC approach to it.
Sure. So Nick, you're not sleeping very much either, it sounds like.
No, we keep busy.
Keep busy, absolutely. So I really want us to dive into, what you're doing, all the different hats you're wearing and the different businesses and ventures. But to start us off, what I'd really like to understand is, how both of you got into entrepreneurship, what caused you to, leave the corporate world. And let's talk a little bit about, why you decided to maybe do that together, at least at the same time, and kind of what that's meant to you and your family and things like that. So Nick, if you don't mind, just kind of share your thoughts on, what was it that caused you to go down this path? And obviously you had a very successful career, and, how'd you end up where we are today?
Yeah, no, good question. Entrepreneurship, I think it's one of those things where I think any entrepreneur will tell you it's kind of in your blood, right? So, and I remember even being in high school, I was the kid that was making like hemp bracelets and necklaces and selling those in school. And, I was always doing something on the side to make money, whether it was trading baseball cards or something like that. I stuck to the traditional approach to life, I think, for quite a while, just because that stability feels good, right? And it's hard to imagine yourself without some sort of consistent income or a way to plan that. But over time, I think that just kind of, like a lot of people are experiencing right now, just wore me out in one way or another. That could be in just that 9 to 5 grind, commute and in office hours and just things that didn't feel really productive, to just kind of the lack of, time at home with your family, especially when you've got kids. It just kind of wears you out after a while. And so we both kind of got to the same point in our careers where, we were successful. We were in good positions, high level positions, but it just didn't feel like we made it, right? It didn't feel like we made it. And, that's kind of what pushed us into looking for other opportunities. During the pandemic, Leah will talk about it, but she got a real estate license during that time. And I really like being able to come in and help people out, right? And I know a lot of businesses needed that kind of help. So that's where I kind of got the consulting idea, and that was where I started. And then the franchise idea kind of came along almost simultaneously, and it just seemed like a good natural fit. Just coming from the HR realm, a recruiting franchise really fit well. So that kind of helped me make that jump a little easier. And the startup cost for that one was fairly low, around 75 grand, and we determined that to be pretty feasible for us. And so we kind of dove in and made that move.
Sure. And Nick, you were doing some consulting and kind of had your own business going prior to really leaving the corporate world full time. Is that right?
A little bit. So I didn't have much of a, Rolodex, right? Not much of a client list, and so I was open to developing that in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is I partnered with a company called Predictive Index. They're a behavioral, type software. So they have software that helps you, hire the right people, assess your current population, kind of doing that employee engagement type survey, and also team building. I had used their software in the past in one of my roles, and I really liked it and what it had to offer. And so I also got licensed to sell that product along with my consulting business, and that was kind of my way to kind of get a foot in a couple of doors. I have one, main client that I spend a lot of time with here. It's a small cafe and a family friend of mine that was started back in 2014, and that was my first client, and that's kind of who I've stuck with the whole time to get me through as well.
Sure, sure. And Leah, let's talk a little bit about your journey. Did you jump off and kind of become the entrepreneur first before Nick, or did you follow his lead? Like, talk a little bit about, your path to getting here.
Yeah, so I am not, I wouldn't say quite the opposite, but I like the stability of a full-time job, the consistent income. And, I was hesitant to jump into the franchise um, world. So I'm like, well, asking all the questions. Well, what if this happens? Or what if this happens? So to backtrack a little bit, I started out as, your normal general accountant. I moved all the way up to unit controller. Like he said, we were in high level positions. Um, it just so happened that Nick brought up the franchise idea probably at the beginning of this year. And I was, like, all right, like I get it. It would be cool to have, have our own thing, make our own hours, have the flexibility. Um, and then, unfortunately, my dad's health took a turn. So I had to, kind of facilitate him in the hospital, all that stuff like that. I was trying to work my current full-time position at the hospital. They didn't like that very much. So it was kind of like this is kind of falling into place for the franchise thing to work. So I just kind of was like, I'm going to quit my job. So I quit my job. I got to hang out with my dad for the last bit of his life. And now we have our own franchise and we're just doing our own thing. So it just, like I said, it fell into place. I got to give Nick the credit for researching it all because I did not do that. He was able to give me all the information, but I'm not mad we did it. I'm very happy. I think that we're probably the happiest we've been in a couple of years just because of the flexibility and the ability to, like I said, make our own hours and kind of do our own thing. It's refreshing.
So,
And I will add that I'm the one that always says, when she asks those kinds of questions, what happens if this happens, and then what do we do if this happens? I'm the one. We'll figure it out. That's always my answer. We will figure it out. We're smart people. We can work this out one way or another. Trust me. Like, let's take this leap. We can do this.
sure, sure. So, a lot of couples might, might have one person left their job and had some stability on the other side, but you both committed and went all in. And talk a little bit about what that's meant for you guys personally. I mean, we'll talk about the business later, but how's that changed your personal lives? Your life, your relationship. What has that meant for you guys? Making this leap together.
Yeah, I'll start with that. So for us, I wouldn't say it's really changed our relationship dynamic much. We've always been in. All of our friends kind of will say the same thing. We're just one of the most solid couples that they know. We gel. We really work well together. Both as business partners and as life partners. And so I think we've built, in our relationship a good ground of base communication, open communication. We're always very in tune with one another. So I think that's made the transition into kind of working together and working through this process together a little easier. I will say it's not without trials and tribulations, right? I mean, doing anything on your own without that stability, that safety net to back you is always a little stressful at times. But we're good at supporting one another, making sure we each have our time to be individuals and away from work, and then come back with fresh ideas and a newfound energy to keep things trucking. We just have to go back and forth on that.
Agreed. And family calendars help a lot, especially because, I'll randomly have to have a showing later in the day and I'll like, surprise, now I have to leave at 4 p.m. to go show a house. But yeah, family calendars help a lot. So we stay organized with that. And like he said, just a lot of communication. And I just think we're good partners, so we're both very lucky.
Sure, sure. And Leah, you mentioned, being able to spend some time with your father before he passed. What's your personal time been like now? One of the reasons a lot of us get the idea of venturing off and being our own boss is that at least have control of our own time. Generally, we have less free time, but we have control of that, right? What does that mean for you guys? Are you able to travel more? Are you able to kind of control your own schedule now? Like, what does it mean, being your own boss now?
For me, it's amazing because I can, if I'm not feeling like I want to work that day, I can just say, you know what, I'm going to take the day off, and it's no big deal because because we are our own
Sure.
bosses. But you
Yep.
have to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Balanced and responsible. You can't.
Hmm.
I'm going to take the whole week off, but
Yep.
you can give
Yep.
yourself a bonus day here and there. But yeah, you
Sure.
definitely have to stay motivated and don't be too lenient on your days off. But it's been great having the personal flexibility to just be able to not have to worry when you're scheduling doctor appointments. On the phone you're
Hmm.
normally like, well, I can do Tuesday at noon or next week at 7, but now you're like, whenever's good. I'll make it work.
Sure.
So the
Sure.
schedulers probably love us when we call for appointments now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Leah, your background was in accounting, so obviously, very numbers-driven industry. A lot of the things that we talk about with entrepreneurs is they're really good at their business and everything, but they don't know their numbers and things like that. How do you think your diversity and with Nick coming from HR and yours on accounting, has that helped you guys be a team business, ownership group, or where have you seen your strengths and weaknesses sort of complement each other?
It's definitely a bonus that he's got the HR experience and then I got the have the financials. He also has the financials, but obviously he strayed from accounting into HR, so it wasn't his forte. So with the recruiting thing, I was nervous to go into it because it's a lot of talking to people, and in accounting you don't really talk to people. But I do have a background in bartending, so I'm like, all right, I can do this. But the funny thing is the predictive index product that he was talking about. He sent the test to me to take it, and he matched my results with a recruiter's results, and I'm
Really?
almost identical to a recruiter's
Oh, wow.
predictive index assessment. So I'm like, oh, okay, I could do this.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I'll let Nick
Yeah.
also answer that on the complementing each other with finance and HR too. I'll let him chime in on this one.
No, I think that was like a good approach because I'll be the first one to admit I'm not the one to be like attention to detail, and that's something she's great at. She'll catch errors in stuff I do when it's like I'm typing a blog post or putting something together like that. She's the first one I go to catch those kinds of mistakes. I am definitely more of the creative type, right? The idea type. I always have big ideas and I'm always willing to take a risk and try something out. And she's definitely more the like, okay, so how does this really work? What are the details? And, how feasible is this? And she keeps me grounded in that way. So I don't float off in the clouds too much.
Sure. Well, that's great. I think, know, every business book you read just talks about having, the idea person and then the implementation or the operating person. And it sounds like the two of you work well in that aspect. Um, Nick, let's talk a little bit about, when you left the corporate world, what were the things that you were surprised you were good at, and what are, one of the two things where you actually struggled that, maybe was something that surprised you?
I don't know if I'll say as much as it's a surprise, but so one of the parts of being, an idea person is that I'm good at coming up with a plan or an idea and getting it kicked off. I'm not as good at seeing it through to the end, and
Sure.
not so much that I don't see it through to the end, but I don't want to be super involved all the way to the end. I usually hand that off to somebody else, and then I have a team or somebody that works through that, and I'm kind of here to course correct and reconvene as needed.
Sure.
So that's something that I've had to work more on is I've got this idea, I've got to take it, or this goal, I've got to take it all the way from here to here. Because I have, I'll say self-diagnosed ADHD. I get bored easily, so I like to go to the next thing, like boom,
Yep.
boom, boom, let's move. And I like to move fast. So that's one of the other things I will say is I knew that about myself, but it's one of those things I've had to really manage more. Um,
Sure.
entrepreneurship is definitely about moving fast, but you have to have the right pieces in place before you do it.
Sure. Leah, what about you? What's something that you've been surprised you've been very good at? Obviously, talking to people was something that may have surprised you a little bit, but what are some things that maybe you've learned that you've got to work on?
Yeah, so with the recruiting thing in general, I was terrified to make my most first phone call. I'm like, I'm going to be fumbling over my words. I have no idea what to say to these people. I mean, they give you scripts and I was still like terrified. But once I
Sure.
made my first call, I was like, oh, it wasn't that bad. So it's just like a breaking the ice kind of thing. And I guess at first, I'll be honest, when I quit my full-time job, it was hard for me to discipline myself to sit down and work a full day because I was able to not. So, like I said before, I you just have to discipline yourself, but I allowed myself a little bit of time off to just kind of woosah after the dad thing, and now we're back at it full time, and it's been great.
Yeah, I would add, just to add to that a little bit, that was a huge challenge for her, especially, and for both of us was the timing of her dad's illness. He came down with cancer, and the timing of not only finding that out, but the way it progressed was right as we were starting this franchise. So, I was doing a lot of the onboarding and training pieces solo, and then regurgitating that to her. And so, not only is that harder for me to like do and then reprocess and retrain somebody as I'm being trained, but also really tough for her to like take that in, right, and really be focused on it. I mean, how can you be focused on something like that with what you have going on? And so, it unfortunately got us a slower start probably than we would have had otherwise. But you again, you figure it out, right? That's what it's all about. That's what entrepreneurship's about. You roll with the punches, you figure it out, you pivot, and you keep it rolling.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to take some time to talk about the different businesses, definitely the franchise that you both have, but also your other ventures, and just hear a little bit more about those. So the franchise that you own and operate together is Patrice and Associates. Is that correct? So tell us a little bit about that. What is it that Patrice and Associates offers? Why did you choose that brand specifically? And what's the goals and the plans for that franchise over the next few years?
I'll let Nick take this one.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to that. So, Patrice and Associates is the number one recruiting franchise specifically in the hospitality industry in North America. So, hospitality is it's a huge industry. We specifically recruit salary level employees. So that could be anything from a sous chef to a VP, right, or CFO even, somewhere in that industry. Mostly hotels, restaurants, etc. So you get the picture. So it was a good brand to kind of come into to begin with. They had a nice established brand, a good book of business. You're getting access to their own internal database of resumes as well as their current clients, right? And they share. Franchisees share their book of business as they see fit. So if we have, our internal team, it's me, Leah, I have one other recruiter. If we have too much, of our own business to handle on our own, we can share that with the rest of the franchise, and anybody can come in and work those jobs, help recruit for them. We get a much smaller cut, of course, in that instance, but it's nice that you can kind of always make sure everybody's got work to do and there's money available to come in. So, and then I also mentioned, the franchise fee was attractive. It was $75,000, and that was something that we felt we could swallow in comparison to a lot of other franchises that I would have looked at were easily north of six figures, easily. So it was one of those things where we could say, okay, even if we do this and fail completely, and worst case scenario, we have to go back to corporate America, right, and get back on that horse. $75,000 is just a nice car that we're paying off, right? We can do that, right? We can bite that bullet if we have to. So that was, those things were kind of the big pieces of why we went with that.
Sure. Nick, when you started looking at franchises, did you look specifically for something that kind of related to the HR space? I know recruiting's in that same realm, or like how did you find Patrice and Associates to begin with? Did you work with like a recruiter, or how did you land on that brand?
Yes, good question. So I did. I worked with a recruiter, and I was not, so to answer your first question, I was not zoned in on something HR related specifically. I did kind of fall into HR, and I loved it. I did well at it, and I really enjoyed it. I like making an impact anywhere I'm at, and I felt HR gave me a good opportunity to do that. Especially when you get into a point where you can kind of set strategy and be a little more strategic. Um, but I was not looking specifically for something in that realm. I was pretty open minded to whatever came and felt right that I could do. And actually, I even entertained one that was connected to the real estate industry because I was like, oh, here's another good fit. Leah's already doing real estate. I looked at one that did home inspections and strongly considered that because, hey, any house you sell, then I can go do the inspection, right? And have my company do the inspection. And there we are helping each other out. I settled on, and I worked with a recruiter, and we went through quite a few different ones, and that just happened to be the one I settled on in that case.
Sure, sure. And Leah, you mentioned, Nick kind of selling you on the idea of the recruiting piece and you getting involved in it. Now that you've had the business for a while and you're able to sink your teeth into it, what do you see as the vision for it? And what are your plans for the franchise? And then also, tell us a little bit about your real estate business and what else you have going on.
Okay. Yeah, so our ultimate plan would be, to establish ourselves a little bit, get some more clients of our own, and then what we want to do is get some more recruiters working for us so that we're able to, go out into the actual world and get those clients, so that it's just a whole flow of income. So that's our goal with that. With the and Nick, you can add more onto that if you want, but that's I think our small frame um, gist of it. So if you want to add some more, I can mute real quick before I go into the real estate.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to it. So I would say, on the track of what she's saying, right? We want to have the opportunity for more passive income from it in the long run. Really hands-on recruiting is not what I want to do in the long term. I would much rather hand those duties off, and I'm much better at getting clients. Which I think I was probably in our little training group the first franchisee to land a client, and I landed two pretty quickly.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I'm much more of a salesman, right? When I'm passionate about something, I sell it pretty well. So that's where I find my niche, and it would be much better for us to have a larger group of recruiters to work for us and get their cut, and we just make a little less income, but passively, and allow us to kind of work our other pieces. So yeah, I would say in the next year that would be our main goal.
So back to the real estate thing, I got my license in 2019 while I was still full-time employed. Um, I actually basically did all my schooling while I was working at the office that I was at because I didn't have much else to do. I was pretty efficient at my job at that time. Um, so I basically just I wanted to do something more, and a friend I grew up with, a manager of a real estate broker for my entire life, and he's like, why don't you come to real estate? So we set up a meeting and I decided to go for it. So that was in 2019. Because I was full-time employed, my first couple of years were very slow. um, so now this year and the end of last year I have been picking up speed, a lot of friends and family references, and now I'm getting organic references. So it's really fun. I really do love real estate. I hope that it continues to grow. It's like an adrenaline rush, I think. Like you hit list, you list your house and then you just wait for all the showings to come up, and it's just you get all your offers in. It's just really fun to see what you're going to get out of a house, or and vice versa. If you put an offer in as a buyer's agent, it's like a lottery. If you get the offer, you're like, I won. So it's just a lot of fun. And then
I want to add a piece to that real quick. So when she lists a house, it's always very funny because she lists it and it goes active at midnight. And she's like a 9:30 p.m. bedtime person normally,
Sure.
but on those nights when she's got a listing coming, she'll wait until midnight and then she'll send it to me in a text. We're live.
Yeah.
It's a very funny change.
That's great.
Well, because you want to make sure that it hits everybody's morning emails, so you got to stay up till
Sure.
midnight.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's like New Year's Eve.
That's awesome. Leah, last question here for you. If you were talking to yourself a few years ago or talking to someone now who's, maybe in accounting or another space, but thinking about leaving their full-time job and getting into entrepreneurship or franchising in general, what would be the, top two or three things that you would tell them to consider that, were important factors for you, and then, you look back on it and said, hey, yeah, this is, we feel like we made the right decision.
So I think the first thing is just realizing that you're going to have to live on a budget for a little bit, because that it's a big change not having that weekly check or monthly check, automatically. So just having a good set budget and realizing what cuts you can make here and there. I think another thing would be just believe in yourself. I know that sounds kind of corny and cliche, but I mean, it really means a lot if you're like, I can do this no matter what. And like Nick says, you'll figure it out. So I think those two things are pretty solid.
Sure, absolutely. And Nick, for you, there's a lot of people leaving the corporate space, and a lot of us that are married have tended to develop husband and wife teams. I've worked with my wife for over 7 years now. What are the things that you found are important in that dynamic and adding the business part to the relationship that's helped you and Leah be so successful?
Okay, good question, and that's a tough one. You have to really accept the reality of things that she just talked about, right? So like the budget piece and all of those things, you have to really, well, I talked about communication, right? Let me dial back. Well, I talked about how we communicate really well. That's the biggest piece. You're never going to get anywhere without, effective communication, right? Not just talk to talk, but, talk about what's important, what's going to make an impact to you or your business or your relationship, whether that be business wise or within your relationship itself. You have to really hit those points. And you also have to hold each other accountable. That's the other big piece, and that goes with the communication, right? Because you have to be able to call each other out in a nice, kind, candorous way, so that you're not really, you're not just making each other mad or picking at each other, but like, hey, I kind of feel on an island on this part. Can you give me some more support here, right? Or vice versa. We have our bulletin board a little bit behind me. I don't know if you can see it, but we've got our dry erase board up there where we put a couple of monthly goals, as to what we need to do, and so that kind of helps us be accountable as well. I think our next step is to make each other a little contest, so we can kind of have some competition. I think that's helpful too.
And full disclosure, he did call me out after I quit my job. He was like, "Hey, you're not really working." So that is true. He definitely called me out, but he wasn't mean about it. He's just saying like, "Hey, listen, I've noticed you've been a little, mopey." I'm like, well, given the circumstances, I think I'm allowed to be, but.
Sure. Nick and Leah, thank you again. It's been awesome. We've really enjoyed hearing your story, and we hope to get to visit with you this time next year and get an update on how everything is going. And to anyone that's taken the time to listen to Nick and Leah's story today, we hope you join us in the next episode of the Social Z podcast. Thanks.